Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next version of our RPA webinar series. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg, and I'm going to be your instructor for the next 30 to 45 minutes in this webinar on how to get started with RPA in the enterprise organization. Before I get started, I would like you to give a quick tour of all the functions and features that you can use throughout this webinar. On the left-hand side of this tool, you will see the opportunity to ask questions and to answer some of the questions either through chats or polls. You will also see the opportunity on the left-hand side to download some of the handouts that are made available for this webinar. The handouts that I've uploaded are a summary of the slides that I'm going to discuss today. So by all means, please download them for your own reference and review. Before I get started, I just wanted to do a quick check if everybody can hear me adequately and whether the audio is fine. If somebody could let me know within the chat box, that would be greatly appreciated. Good, I see that people can hear me okay, so that's great. Let's get started with the session today. Good. Before we get started, a couple of key things about this online environment. This might be the first time that you're using Zoho Showtime, so let me give you a quick overview of some of the features and functionalities. First of all, you should know that this webinar is being recorded. And afterwards, we will share a link automatically with you of the entire recording. We will also upload the recording onto YouTube. So if you at every moment you would like to review some section of the webinar today, please visit our page so that you can review the materials from today. What I always like to do during these sessions is to keep them really interactive. This is really one of the key benefits of attending a live webinar. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the question functionality on the left-hand side or to ask questions through chat. The benefit of using the questions functionality over the chat is that all the questions will be ordered and I can sort of walk through them consecutively towards the end of the session today. At the end of this webinar, you will be automatically prompted to provide some of your feedback and let us know what you think about next suitable topics for any upcoming sessions. Good, let me do a very quick introduction of myself. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg and I'm going to be your presenter for today's session. I've been heavily involved within the automation domain for at least the last 7 to 8 years. I'm also the author of the Service Automation Framework book, which was published in 2017, and which is a methodology that is used across the world in order to help enterprises automate their service offering. Today, I'm going to showcase some of the materials from the Service Automation Framework, and will teach you what are some of the key considerations and steps that you can take yourself when considering to set up an RPA program. The world of automation, in my opinion, is really fascinating and very fast growing. So I highly encourage you to get started with this yourself. After today's session, I hope you will start to see what the possibilities of robotic process automation are and what are some of the key benefits that you can use in your organization as well. Besides teaching these kinds of webinars, I do a lot of online training and consulting for companies across Southeast Asia. Cybiant, our company, is based in Kuala Lumpur, so we're making the session available to you from our office today. In case you would like to reach out to me at any moment after today's session, please find on the left-hand side of this slide my contact details. You can always reach out to me on any of the social media or just send me a message the old-fashioned way using my email address. So what are we going to talk about today? I've composed the following agenda for our session. Today, I'm going to get started with making you familiar with the basic key concepts of robotic process automation, and especially why this is relevant in today's day and age. Why was robotic process automation not discussed 10 years ago? And what are some of the fundamental technologies that are driving it? It's good to know a little bit of the background of what RPA is all about. But after that, you would like to get started. The core focus of the webinar today is to provide you with a number of very quick steps on how you can get started by yourself. And the way that we will do that is by introducing the RPA Capability Maturity Model. This is a model that we've been using for the last 5 years in all of our RPA consulting assignments. And it really helps to showcase how organizations can go from zero knowledge and zero best practices when it comes to RPA towards fully functioning automated service delivery organizations in which services are provided in a completely automated fashion. I will think that you will find the RPA Capability Maturity Model one of the key learning points for today's session, and I hope you will start using that after today. Towards the end of the session, we will also do an open Q&A session. But if you have any questions in between, once again, please feel free to ask them at any moment. That will only make the session more interactive and more lively. We have around 20 people in our session today, so it's almost impossible to get an abundance of questions. So again, please feel free to participate at any moment that you would like. That's a little bit of our agenda today and some of the key things that we are going to look at in this webinar session. Good. Let's get started with explaining some of the business case around robotic process automation and why this technology has come towards such great fruition, especially within the last 2 to 3 years. One of the key drivers of RPA technology and automation in general is that enterprise IT organizations are under a tremendous amount of pressure to deliver. You might or might not work in an IT organization, and then you will definitely know what I'm talking about. IT organizations in general are constantly under pressure to deliver more value with less resources. They need to consider new technologies, different systems, newer forms of innovation, and at the same time facilitate a pace of growth, technology updates, and increase customer expectations. The global pandemic that started last year and is still going on has even increased the pressure on IT further. Much of the deliveries today need to be done completely digital and online. And for that reason, there's an increased focus on IT departments. Automation is one of the ways in which can help to deal with all of these different forms of pressures. And within the next couple of slides, I'm going to explain you how automation can help you to leverage and automate some of the repetitive work that you might be facing in your daily work. Whereas the pressures for IT organizations have been rising very rapidly in the last couple of years, a number of the key priorities remain the same. And those are listed on this next overview. First and foremost, it is every organization's prerogative to make sure that they increase the revenues while at the same time lower the overall cost. And whilst doing this, it is expected to improve customer satisfaction overall while providing a pleasurable place to work. Not only are we focusing on getting happier clients, we also want to retain our employees and make sure that they don't need to do needless work over and over again. Additionally, we've seen in the last couple of years that there's increased regulations and regulatory compliancy in order to manage risks in an enterprise organization more suitably. This will result in more work that needs to be done, and at least things that needs to be trackable and traceable. All of these things are happening every single day in every large organization. Making sure that we have the tools to deal with that is very significant in order to understand what can be done in order to make sure that you are able to meet these objectives. And this is exactly where RPA and automation comes in. Because through automation, we can start to automate some of the repetitive work that nobody likes to do. By making sure that we communicate with customers more frequently and instantly, we can make sure that we improve customer satisfaction, whilst at the same time doing more work with less resources. And take into account that I'm not saying we're going to do more work with less persons. because typically organizations that start to implement automation are growing more rapidly than others. So automation is not here to replace any kinds of jobs. So don't be scared about that. Automation is there specifically to make organizations grow by doing things more efficiently, cheaper, with higher reliability, and most of all, faster. And if you're able to accomplish this, your organization will grow consecutively. And that is really what the premise of automation all brings into place. If we look at the way that automation has been disrupting the work that has been going on in most organizations, I always really like the quote that you see here on the next screen, which comes from the McKinsey Global Institute. It says, coming over the horizon is a new wave of opportunity related to the use of robotics, machine learning, and AI. Companies that deploy automation technologies can realize substantial performance gains and take the lead in their industries, even if their efforts contribute to economical level increase in productivity. And this is really one of the key ways in which you should look at automation. It provides opportunity. And by joining this session today, I hope you will start to learn some of these opportunities and how you can leverage them all by yourself. It is my strong belief that organizations that are taking the steps towards automation will outperform others who don't. So it's really an opportunity. The technology is relatively new, and if you've never seen any of the technology in action, I'm pretty sure you're going to be amazed with what can be done. And by reviewing it this way, it really becomes an opportunity to differentiate and also to deliver services quicker and faster overall. So this is really what the premise of automation brings. The question, however, is how is it going to change your business? And also in this field, a lot of research has been done. 93% of organizations say that automation kickstarts digital transformation. And today, I'm hopefully going to show you how to do this all by yourself. In my belief, I think that automation is really one of the easiest drivers of the entire digital transformation. The technology is relatively mature, easy to implement, and follows a process that everyone can understand. Whether it's scanning of invoices, automated approvals, or completely delivering services in the back end completely in an automated way, there are a variety of different use cases in almost every department. And this is also why automation is becoming way more mainstream. Automation used to be something that was just confined towards the information technology department or IT in general. However, nowadays, with the technologies that's available and the ease of use, it actually becomes possible to start automating processes within the HR domain or the finance domain, or even every domain where there's not a lot of technological knowledge. And today I will showcase a little bit on how easy it is to do these kinds of things. So in my opinion, automation is really a great Kickstarter for any digital transformation initiative. The technology is proven and mature, and it's relatively easy to implement. Let us have a quick look at some of the companies and some of the key business drivers for starting with RPA journeys on your own organization. Typically, automation-first companies are the ones that are winning in their market. Think about some of the technologies and companies that you well know, and ask yourself, how much automation are they using? If you're joining today from the Southeast Asia Pacific region, you're probably familiar with applications like Grab, which provide a variety of different services. A lot of the aspects of these kinds of companies have been completely automated. The workflows have been automated, the contact with employees has been automated, payments, rewards, and even searching for services has been done in a completely automated fashion. And you can see how effective this is. These kinds of companies have been growing more rapidly than any of their competitors. And this is highly driven by automation. It is my strong belief that automation will help you win in the data economy. And by applying these kinds of tools and technologies, you can outperform your other competitors who don't. If you are able to execute your processes or the amount of work that you need to do on a daily basis more efficiently and with fewer mistakes, you're destined to win in a competitive market. And that's really what automation will bring. Therefore, I encourage every company to become an automation adopter instead of an automation avoider, because it will really provide you with some of the tools that are necessary in order to take the next steps and do things faster, smarter, and cheaper than any of your competitors. So how can you exactly get started? And how can you do that? Let's first review in essence and in definition what RPA exactly is. As you're probably familiar, RPA stands for Robotic Process Automation. But what you might not be so familiar with is that when we're talking about RPA, is that we're actually talking about software. When we're saying that a robot is actually executing work, what we're referring to is a software license that is actually executing. So if we're saying that a company is using 10 robots or 20 robots, it just means that they have 10 or 20 software licenses. So the first thing that I want you to understand about RPA is that it's essentially software. And it's something that you can install in your machine or server, and that is there just like any other application. The only difference is that RPA technology is able to integrate with all of your other applications. No matter what your technology stack is or which kinds of applications you're running, with this software, you are able to transmit data between different applications, design workflows across whatever applications you have running on your system, and to trigger those workflows automatically. So in that sense, I always say that RPA is basically mimicking human activity. Any activity that is done behind a computer by a human being in any organization can be repeated by a robot. So if you're working in an HR department and you're composing employment contracts every now and then for the new hires, that's a process that can be automated. If you are copying and pasting information from invoices into, for instance, SAP in order to make payments, and you do that in a repetitive way, then that's a process that can be automated. If you follow similar steps on your computer every day, like opening your email, keying in information in different systems, whether it's HR, finance, or for instance, warehouse systems, that's a process that can be automated. So the key focus is to figure out what that human activity is that is done behind the computer. And where the big benefit of RPA starts coming in is if that process is repeatable. So robots are very, very good at doing repetitive work. They're not so good at doing very creative work. Don't ask a robot to design a building automatically or to make a nice drawing or a painting or something like that. But the things that are happening in a lot of organizations over and over again, that is really the sweet spot for robots and automation. And a lot of large enterprises and large organizations have a lot of processes that need to be done repetitively. Think about filing taxes, producing reports, executing workflows, registering visitors, creating cards, etc. Many organizations are characterized by the fact that they have a lot of repetitive processes. And that's exactly where RPA starts to come in. So how can we do that? In order to understand that, let us first explore in a little bit more detail what a robot is able to do. And the next slide kind of summarizes it very adequately. First of all, you should understand that a robot can basically do anything that a person can do. So whether it's logging into an application, creating or making files and folders, reading and writing data to databases, or for instance, scraping data from the web. If you are typing in something into a Google search bar, the robot can do that in the exact same way. For that reason, it's also one of the key use cases of RPA to get information from a variety of sources and actually input that into the right location. Whether it's information that has been sent to you through vendors in the form of a PO, or for instance by suppliers in the form of an invoice. What robots can do is automatically extract the information that is presented in invoices and then automatically import them into a structured format within your own systems. They can do that by opening emails, extracting documents and information, or even making some of the basic calculations. For instance, matching a PO value with the actual invoice. There's a lot of variety of different use cases when it comes to automation. But I want you to understand and want you to start thinking in terms of what an automatable process is. Basically, if you are repeating steps on your machine more than a couple of times a week, then that's probably a process that can be automated very easily. The basic idea of robotic process automation is that it mimics human decision making and that it mimics the steps that you are doing on a particular machine. So where does that happen? Where do we find those key benefits of automation? We've now seen in the previous couple of slides what RPA is trying to address. We looked at the way that robots are defined and the way that robots are executed. Some of the robots, therefore, are primarily used within internal operations, technology enhancements, accountability and audit, and data analytics and reporting. And if you have a particular use case within any of these domains, I promise you that RPA is a solution that can help you do this more efficiently. Let's start with a quick review of internal operations. In internal operations, we typically have process-oriented organizations, like for instance, a back office or shared service center. These things have been combined into shared service centers, particularly because there is a lot of focus on doing things more efficiently when they're grouped together. So whether you're thinking about finance, human resources, IT services, or even procurement, all of these aspects of these kinds of processes are done in a similar fashion over and over again. The same is true for work that needs to be done within technology. Whether it's importing or outputting data towards different systems, this is done very frequently. I think we're all familiar with situations where we're actually putting and inputting and outputting data between different systems. This will help with data verification and validation, and will able to transfer data between different systems accurately. The other important thing to realize is that robots don't make mistakes. If you're programming a robot to work at a particular moment during the day, it will actually help them to do this in exactly the right moment. For that reason, robots will help in order to increase compliance and make sure that things are done in a repetitive and a controllable way. The last part where robots are very commonly used is within data analytics and reporting. Whether you are combining information through a variety of different systems or need to produce a report every other week, a robot can be programmed in order to do that in a very efficient and time-bound way. So now that we've seen some of the use cases, let us see what is actually powering RPA technology. And in order to understand how these kinds of applications work, you should see that RPA is basically composed of three major technologies. First of all, let me start with screen scraping, which is a process that not a lot of people are familiar with. Screen scraping is the process of collecting screen display information. In other words, the data that is available on your user interface. When you are opening up an application, a web browser, or any other kind of software tool and start to see where data is being stored, that is known as screen scraping. Everywhere on any application, there will be fields that will be populated and information that is being retrieved from different systems. By following what you are doing with your mouse or your keyboard within a particular application, we can start building a process. And that process will be followed through the screen scraping technology. The second major technology is business process automation. And I'm pretty sure you heard about that before. In business process automation, what we're trying to accomplish is to automate common business processes. Here we're looking at the technology to execute workflows and do things in a sequential order. The last major technology driver that is empowering RPA technology today is artificial intelligence. And I know that this is kind of a word that is being overused quite a lot, but with artificial intelligence within an RPA technology solution, we're really teaching a robot how they can do things more smartly, efficiently, and in order to kind of support their own decision making. So it's the culmination of these three technologies that make RPA solutions at where they are today. And they're really a fundamental overview of what is powering most of RPA technologies within any modern enterprise. So the next question is then, how can you get started? Now that you know what some of the benefits are, and you've maybe already looked at some RPA tools, the most difficult part is how can you get started by yourself? So within our experience over the last couple of years in doing a number of RPA implementations, ranging from very small to very large firms, there's a very common approach that most companies take. And within the next few slides, I will kind of talk you through this in a step-by-step approach. The first and most crucial step on any RPA journey is to start with strategy alignment. What do we mean with that? Every organization, whether you're producing insurance papers or manufacturing sneakers, has a particular strategy. And that strategy outlines the overall organizational objectives, growth plans, as well as the corporate goals. Based on that overall overarching strategy of the entire organization, there are typically department plans that are being worked out by different department heads. For instance, as you can see here on the slide, the organizational strategy will cascade down into an IT strategy, financial strategy, HR strategy, etc. And this is the moment where RPA starts to come in. What you would need to do as a first step in the setting up your RPA program is to align your RPA objectives with the underlying strategy of the organization. So for instance, in your IT strategy, if you need to deliver a higher accuracy of service against more limited costs, that is the key driver for an RPA program. If you want to make sure that you retain people or, for instance, have less churn within your staff, that's a key driver for RPA. So the first key thing to do is to really understand where RPA can help to meet your business objectives. And only if you're able to make that match in order to see how automation can support your overall organizational strategy, that's when you're posed for success. RPA should never be seen just as a tool for efficiency, because that is not underlying the important parts that you're trying to accomplish. So always start from a strategical alignment. And from that strategic alignment, you can start to identify a number of different automation projects. And this is what we can see here on the next slide. Automation projects are linked towards your business strategy. And on this slide, we've outlined a number of very common use cases. For example, within finance, you have very common processes like process to pay, order to cash, or record to report. These happen in almost every organization and are primary use cases for robotic process automation. The same can be said for supply chain, IT, HR, or customer services. All of these different departments will have a number of repetitive processes that need to be carried out as part of the day-to-day execution. The next key step is that as soon as you've selected a particular use case, you need to start designing these automated solutions one process at a time. And in order to do that, you will need to start learning how to use a robot designer. You might have been on one of my previous courses where we took a deep dive in how to set up an automation environment and where you will be learning how all of the different tools work together. Unfortunately, in this short webinar that we're presenting today, we're not going to dive in the technology itself. That would require a longer session, around 2 to 3 hours, to make you familiar with some of the basic interfaces and the way to design robots. However, if you're interested in learning more about that, I highly recommend that you sign up for one of our free RPA development courses, which are executed once every month on a Friday morning. There, within a 3-hour window time, you will learn more on how to design your own robots, and we'll dive into the technology itself. Having said that, it is really important that you become familiar with some of the basic software that is needed to set up and design your robots. And don't worry, you don't need to be a technology or IT expert. Many of the RPA solutions, including the ones that we're using, can be set up using drag and drop interfaces, and it's actually quite simple to design some of the first robots all by yourself. But the key point is one of the statements that I made earlier in the session today. A robot, in essence, is a software program. So just like you would be needing to type a letter in Word or calculate some cells in Excel, you would need to design a robot within a workflow design a robot program. And that's what you would need to do next for each of your individual levels. After you've identified those use cases in step number 1, it is time to start introducing the RPA maturity model. The RPA maturity model that we're presenting here on the screen represents best practices in terms of thinking on how you can get started and grow with automation solutions over time. Generally speaking, almost every organization will go through 4 different phases when starting to embed and implement RPA maturity models. The first phase is what we typically refer to as the startup RPA program, and it's typically associated with level 1. Within the startup program, you need to start building knowledge. That's most basically the crucial stage. The second part that's important in the startup program is to identify a number of use cases where you can start to make some quick wins when it comes to automation projects. Most organizations, when they have their first couple of pilots running, will start to move towards level 2, which represents the emerging RPA program. Within this phase, there are a lot of other aspects that come into play. Think about setting up your security or information privacy procedures. And how do you deal with robots that are being used over different individual departments? After you've gone through level number 2, similarly, there are more things to consider in levels 3 and 4. But since this webinar is called Getting Familiar with an Introduction to RPA, I assume that most people on the call today will be in either level 1 or level 2. So on this slide, you can kind of see a summary of what happens when you're actually executing that within levels 1 and 2. The RPA maturity model that we've discussed on this phase is actually something that you can measure. So before you get started with any kind of implementation, what we typically recommend is to assess your current capability and identify a number of different gaps. For instance, there might be a knowledge gap, or there might be a lack of written down process documentation, or there might not be clarity on how a particular workflow is being executed in the long run. All of these things are aspects that you can identify. And in order to get started a successful RPA project, these are some of the key things that you would need to address. In order to understand how to do that, you will need to start building capability. And with capability, we mean the technical as well as the human components that you would need in order to be successful with RPA. As we've seen with the first step, which is the identification of use cases, we then need to start moving towards the building of the first couple of robots. And in order to do that, we need to identify the processes that can be automated. Remember that all the way at the beginning of the webinar, I said that there's always a couple of key processes that you can identify that will give you an overview of what is work that you will do on a daily basis. For instance, I named the example of finding, scanning, and inputting data, for instance, from invoices. That's a process. You will do it in exactly the same way every single time. So in order to build that robot, we will need to have some capabilities in order to how to design and build these robots. And this is typically where we're referring to the capabilities in terms of education and knowledge around RPA. Once you've built your first couple of robots, they might be successful right away, but in more common cases, there might be some improvements that you would need to make later onwards. So it's very important that you embed the lessons that you learned in previous implementations when you're designing and building your next couple of robots. So it's a continuous cycle. And as you will go through it, you will start to build more capability through the number of use cases that are being executed. Good. In order to do that, one of the key and crucial points is that you measure and monitor your results. The most important part about robotic process automation is that you can showcase what robots are able to do in terms of the work that they're taking over from day-to-day operations. And there's very good dashboards available that are able to help you do this. Here you see an example of an analytics dashboard that can showcase you how many robots are running every day, what are the number of robot hours that have been produced, and what is the number of average work hours that a virtual robot will implement and augment your workforce. You can also see if any of the robots are offline or whether you need to pay attention towards processes that are not running anymore. So that's also one of the key things to note. Setting up a robot is one thing, but making sure that it keeps running is something that requires constant attention and that you would like to implement through analytics and data analysis. If we look at some of the key best practices that we've learned over the years and which provide you with an overview of how you can get started, there are 5 key lessons that you can see here on this slide. The first one is just to get started. Download some of the trial licenses with which you can set up your first robot and start building for yourself. In order to get started and see the benefits, you actually need to implement them. Start with initial planning and get started with any first use case that you think might be beneficial for your organization. A second key part is to start identifying some of the most important use cases right from the beginning. For that reason, it's very important that there's a very effective collaboration between the teams that want to implement RPA, like for instance a finance or IT department, and the CIO office. The CIOs play a critical role in creating a successful environment in which RPA can prosper. Remember that in the end, RPA is software licenses, so they will always have an impact on the underlying IT environment. The third key practice lesson is to establish aggressive goals and deliver. In order to showcase what RPA can do, it's almost always better to build an actual use case and to showcase that towards the rest of the organization. You can provide all the use cases and technology benefits on slides for the entirety of time, but once people start to see how easy it is to set up a robot and how they are able to get a return on their investment, that's pretty much the moment they get hooked themselves. I still remember the first time that I saw an RPA robot in operation around 6 or 7 years ago. And I was actually amazed at how simple it was and how it could actually take away a lot of the repetitive work that we needed to do in the organization. The fourth key lesson comes with investing in process assessment and improvement capabilities. RPA is a particular technology, and in order to become good at it, you need to learn more about it. So by joining this session today, and hopefully some of our follow-up sessions, you will be able to learn more on how to design robots, how to set them up, how to manage them, but most importantly, how to design workflows within a robot environment. And then the last key lesson that we've seen over time is that you will definitely need to balance the dual priorities from robot design and speed in the one hand, but also governance in the other hand. Take into account that we always need to keep tracking what robots actually do within an organization, and that there's sufficient accountability for all the data that is being moved between different applications. So I hope that this overview provided you with some information and use cases on how you can get started with RPA by yourself. Accelerating the adoption of RPA is really one of the key elements and benefits that you would like to do. So in case you're interested in learning more about that, I highly recommend that you can proceed with our RPA Discovery Workshop. An RPA Discovery Workshop is a half-day free workshop which includes the maturity assessment that I've just showcased on the screen. You can use that for use case development or setting up your business case. So if you're interested in that, go towards the link on the slide below and request a free discovery workshop. We provide this free of charge for any organization who's interested to learn more about RPA. And within that half-day window of time, we have much more time to go into the details of individual use cases and individual processes that might be working in your organization. Additionally, we have a white paper available about the RPA Discovery Workshop, which you can request, and it is able to provide you with more information. If you're interested in that, please reach out to us after the webinar today, and we would be able to share you the details and information around this. Good. I hope that this overview provided you with a good introduction towards RPA and how you can get started with RPA solutions in your own enterprise. Let's see if there's time for a couple of key questions before we wrap up the webinar today. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat or into the question box right now. Good. If there's no questions, let me start some of the polls to see what this webinar has brought to you. If it's correct, you will see the poll opening up on the screen right now. Very good. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds before I close the poll. Very good. And most people have it indeed correct. The best description of RPA is a software license that mimics human action on a particular computer. Very good. In the meantime, I saw that a particular question comes in. Question is, what is the difference between RPA and service automation? That's a very good question, and let me explain that in a little bit more detail by explaining what service automation is. Service automation is basically the approach in which you automate the end-to-end delivery of a service completely through an automated portal. Here, think about issuing insurance, or for instance, booking a flight. All of these are completely digital services nowadays. RPA empowers service automation because it looks at specific key components of service automation and is able to automate some of the underlying business processes that you would need in order to deliver your automated services. So there's actually a very close relationship between service automation and RPA. RPA looks typically a little bit more at the technical side, whereas service automation looks more from an end-to-end service delivery point of view. I hope that that answers your question. Are there any other questions for today? If they're not, I would like to thank everyone for their time today. Thanks so much for joining the session again, and we hope to see you on any of our upcoming Cybiant webinar series. Thanks again for joining, and we will share the recording with you afterwards. Thank you and have a great afternoon.